it's Halloween season, if you can't tell. And today I am caking 3 popular Halloween candies, a giant gummy pumpkin, a giant eyeball gummy, and candy corn, which I'm not a fan of. Okay, so if you like candy corn, leave a comment below. I feel like this is gonna be very divided. We're gonna start Halloween wars right here, candy wars. And I haven't met many candies that I don't like.
Met candies?
Yes, you know when you're introduced to a candy.
I have a question that I'm not sure if I want to hear the answer.
Do it.
Do they introduce themselves back?
No, I'm not there yet. But when I get there, run. I'm making all 3 of these cakes with my vanilla batter, but I'm going to manipulate it in different ways to suit each cake. For the candy corn, I've divided my batter in 3, and I'm going to leave 1 portion, its natural color, and dye the other 2 portions, 1 orange and 1 yellow, to represent all the colors in candy corn. Then I poured my batter into my pan with the help of Helena, who held 2 plastic scrapers as dividers. And then I poured in the 3 different batters and then carefully lifted the scraper. I want to see how this bakes and how it maintains the 3 separate stripes. For the eyeball gummy, I am using vanilla batter. I'm taking a little out and dyeing it a very bright red, and I'm baking this cake in a half sphere pan. So what I did is I used a spatula and I created 5 sort of stripes along the side of red batter, then carefully poured in plain vanilla batter, put a little more red batter in the center, more vanilla batter, and now let's just see how it bakes. I want it to look like a bloodshot eye. Now my cakes are all baked, cooled, and chilled. It is time to cut and carve them. I leveled the candy corn cake, and boy am I happy with the stripes, but when I flipped it over to cut off the caramelization, I was even more happy because the stripes look better on the bottom of the cake. Now I'm simply going to shape this cake into candy corn, which is kind of like a long sort of triangle, not too perfect. And then I used a small serrated knife to round out the edges. Now I'm going to cut this cake into 2 very thin layers. Candy corn. Moving on to my pumpkin cake, I've removed my cakes from the pan. I leveled one, cut it in 2, and then the other cake I didn't level, but I cut it into 2 layers, and now I'll stack all 4 layers and carve my pumpkin. I kept the hump because the gummy is sort of rounded at the top, so now I'm just carving down the sides in a bit of an A line. This cake is wider at the bottom, thinner at the top, and then I have to cut grooves into this cake. So 8 grooves all along the side to make it look like a pumpkin, as well as using my serrated knife to cut a little valley on the top, because this cake has a nub.
You're just gone.
I'll never make it as a cat.
It's 1-eared cat.
I'm like a tough cat. I was in a street fight. I'm feral. You know what I mean? This is how this is why I look like this. I just had to beat up all the other cats. The next thing I want to do is the eyeball cake, so I'm going to level it in its pan, tip it out of the pan, remove the parchment, and then I'm just going to do a little bit of carving. It's a little bit lower, it's too high right now, so I'm just keeping its shape but shaving off a bit of cake, and then I'm going to cut this cake into 2 layers as well. So now I have an assortment of cut cakes, different colors, all vanilla, and it's time to simple syrup all of these layers. The next thing I'm going to do is fill and crumb coat each cake. Starting with candy corn, I filled it with a generous layer of Italian meringue buttercream, putting a little more on the yellow side just to maintain that diagonal angle. Then I crumb coat the cake entirely. For the pumpkin cake, I carefully unstack the layers in order, fill and stack them back together, and then crumb coat. This one's kind of the most difficult because it can be difficult to ice within the ridges that I carved along the side. I still think it's a beginner cake. Next, I filled and stacked the eyeball cake, just 1 layer of filling, crumb coated around the sides. Now all my cakes are crumb coated, it's time to go back and ice them. I'm icing the candy corn, I'm icing the pumpkin. This one's the hardest still because of the ridges. And then I'm icing the eyeball, and I'm using my invention to help me keep it smooth. The next thing I need to do is cover these cakes accordingly. So for the candy corn, so I rolled out 3 bands of fondant, then I lined them up together to make sure they were the same thickness by rolling my rolling pin over. I trimmed the top edge of the yellow fondant. It doesn't have to be a perfect line. I would never do this without a ruler normally, but the colors on candy corn are not perfectly straight. They sort of blend into each other ever so slightly. Then I cut a strip of the orange, lay it on the cake, making sure it lines up with the yellow, smoothing it over the top and down around the sides, and then I do the same thing with the off-white fondant. Now it is time to trim the fondant, cutting away the excess and tucking it underneath the candy corn to maintain that sort of curve, that natural curve that it has. And then what I want to do is make sure that there's obviously a seam on purpose, but I want the seam to look finished. So I want to make sure there's no gap or space between the colors of fondant. This cake does need... It's cool! It's like, it's announcing. The candy corn does have some subtle texture. There's like 3 little ridges in the top. And at first I was contemplating carving them out of the cake, but the truth is they're not that deep. So I'm just gonna use a ball tool and a veining tool to indent these ridges in the candy corn. I promise, this is truly a beginner cake. You can make this. Now for the pumpkin, I am going to cover the whole cake with orange fondant. Because there's a valley on top, it's very important that you poke the top with like a straight pin because air is naturally gonna get trapped in that valley. So just poke it with a pin, let the air out, and you don't have to worry about the hole you've created because this has a green nub on top, so it's going to be covered. You want to smooth the fondant all around the sides and then really accentuate those ridges. So I just use my fingertips to push the fondant into the ridges so we can see them, tucking the fondant under the cake and then trimming away the excess. It's time for the nub, and I must say, this is the simplest nub I've ever made on the channel. The nub is just like a roundish green ball of fondant. Yeah, it's candy. It has no texture. It is nothing like a watermelon nub or a squash nub. It's just not up there with the other nubs. You know what I mean? This is a beginner nub. This, I promise you, this is a beginner nub. Anyone can make this nub. There's one more step for this pumpkin, but first I'm gonna chill the cake. Okay, so now I'm gonna cover the eyeball cake. This one is the trickiest, but also I had the most fun. It looks like a bloodshot eye and it has sort of red veins running through it. So I just rolled tubes of red fondant. Okay. I patted it down and then I made 5 incisions into the fondant, not right to the center, almost like a pie, but not going right to the center because I don't want it to come apart. Then I inserted those tubes in the incisions. Then I started to roll it out. And so I draped it over my cake, and the problem was the lines were there was too much white in the center and the lines were too low. So I quickly ripped it off, cut a little crisscross in the center, and then I sort of picked it up like a drape. So this way I could drape it over the cake, but sort of pull it up as I did so. This caused some creasing in the fondant, which normally would make me scream, like a deadly Halloween horror scream. But the gummies aren't perfect, and if you look at them up close, there's some sort of veining. They look wrinkly. So I was okay with this. I embraced it, and then I smoothed it all around and trimmed away the excess at the bottom. The eyeball isn't done though. It needs an iris and a pupil, right? An iris? The iris is the colored part of your eye? Are you sure? Are we right? I was right?
You were right.
Yeah, baby!
The opposite of what I'm saying.
Yeah, baby! The pupil is the black center. Yeah, baby! Did I say yeah, baby? Yep. Yeah, baby! I rolled out a little bit of fondant on my non-stick board. Did the same for the pupil. Put it on top. I smoothed out the edges so it wouldn't be a perfect circle and it wouldn't look like a cut out circle, if that makes sense. Then I placed it on top of the eyeball cake and also worked it in so it seemed like it was one. There's one more thing I want to do to this cake, which is use a little bit of clear piping gel and brush it onto the pupil and iris because that part of the gummy seems shinier. Yeah, it's actually more like gelatinous. It's kind of see-through like Jello, but I couldn't do that on the cake. We need to go back to my pumpkin gummy cake because the pumpkin gummies I bought are coated in sugar. So I'm gonna brush the entire pumpkin cake with its simple nub with some clear piping gel, and then I'm going to use handfuls of granulated sugar and press it along the side. I wish I had coarse sugar, but I couldn't find it, and part of me thinks it would have looked too white because coarse sugar can be quite opaque. We're gonna have a cat fight. I'm reminding you that I'm a cat. So there you have it. 3 Halloween candies. What are you guys wearing on Halloween this year? What are you dressing up as? Are you gonna be like me? Are you gonna be like a feral street cat with a broken ear? I think this is an amazing costume.
Sure.
How are you dressing? Are you dressing up, Orhan?
No, but I feel like we'll see a lot of Barbies and Kens.
You're right about that.
And we'll see a lot of Oppenheimers. So there'll be a lot of people in suits.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, guys, I hope you've enjoyed this edition of Halloween How to Cake It. There will be more. There's always more.
Ooh.
That was pathetic. I thought you like horror films.
Yeah, I made the ghost noise.
Okay, that ghost isn't very scary.
Oh, look at the ghost that I'm seeing right now.
He's adorable!